friends are synths.
So, welcome to All My Friends Are Synths. Contrary to what the name of this channel suggests, I do actually know some people in real life, or well, maybe not know them in real life, but real life people, I guess. So I thought I would take the opportunity to talk to some of those interesting people and get them to come on and talk about what they do and stuff. So today, the first guest, or the first victim, I guess it might be, depending on how well this goes, is Nyokee, aka Dr. Kirsten Hermes. Did I pronounce Hermes right? Or is it Hermes?
Hermes. I mean, it was close enough.
Okay, that's good. So Kirsten's a senior lecturer in music production at University of Westminster in London. I hope it's in London, or I've got that wrong. But she's just released just released a book specifically looking at live performance, and she's also got a dead interest in YouTube channel and stuff where she talks about performing live and doing all that stuff. So thanks for agreeing to give up your time on a, well, I guess I won't say the day because that'll age it, but thanks for coming and speaking to me.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's really awesome how much support you've given me over the past kind of months, I guess, and I've really enjoyed watching your stuff as well. For me, it's like the right blend of kind of like weirdly entertaining and funny, but also like lots of tech. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks very much. I'll pay you later for the various kind words that you've said in the video, per instance, so it could add up. But obviously, I want to talk about your book because that's partly, well, one of the main reasons I asked you to come on was that, yeah, there you go. Perfect. But I guess before getting into that, it makes sense to like get a better idea of who you are, because obviously, you're a lecturer, you are an active musician, but I was curious about how you got to this point where you're like, in academia doing music and writing music on production and performance. Like, how did you get into that musical world in the first place?
Yeah, I often ask myself who I am as well. I don't know. I mean, how did I end up here? So I suppose I started out by studying music production, and I ended up in this weird space where I was really kind of fascinated by, like, I guess the science behind music production. So I did this PhD in sound perception to do with like how humans hear sound and when stuff sounds nice. But then I realized actually I kind of also just want to be an artist and perform my own stuff. And being a lecturer is a nice thing for me to do because it's kind of, it allows me to sort of pass on the knowledge to other people. I'm also really inspired by a lot of my students, to be honest, because they all have really cool ideas. And then with the book, I mean, so Routledge, the publisher, sort of reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to write a book. I still don't really know why, but I don't know. I thought, it's not something I've ever considered doing, but at that point in time, I thought, why not? And I guess the topic kind of came to me fairly naturally because I've been producing my own music for a long time, producing electronic music. And I'm kind of very much like someone, like, like a painter that layers all the tracks and works in a box and tries to come up with like a really good track, but then has no clue what to actually do live. So it's kind of something that's fascinated me for a while. I don't know if that's answered the question as to who I am.
Well, I mean, yeah, you've taken up all that answered every question I've written down, so now I'm going to have to wing it completely. So that's great. Thanks a lot.
We just follow each other for the rest of this interview.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess, so how did you're classically trained as well, is that right? So you play violin? Although I don't know my stringed instruments very well, so that could be a viola or something.
No, it was correct. So I started playing the violin. It's actually my first instrument, and I started playing it when I was 6. And I played in various different orchestras. I'm from Germany, and so like that's where I first started playing violin, I guess. And then much, much later, I sort of discovered in my teens, like Cubase music production, and I realized, hey, this is cool. I can actually play more than one sound at the same time. I went downhill from there.
Well, actually, that's funny because the reason I kind of came across you first was because we're both kind of involved in the chip music world.
Yeah.
And I think I saw an interview, like a short clip you did with a guy I know called Stephen, who's from, he's in Myths and Monsters.
Yeah.
So I think it was from some festival somewhere, but I put him on a few years ago at a gig in Glasgow, and that's kind of the connection there. But I was kind of fascinated with the idea of, an academic who's into chip music, because there are a couple of them, well, a couple of them, a couple of you, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm especially interested in it because I think chip music is like the, and I'm trying not to swear here since I'm on YouTube, but it's like the wee cousin, of EDM and stuff. It's kind of looked down on in the electronic music world a bit. It's been like not as serious, or like, just people playing about with Game Boys and things. And so I'm curious how well, maybe you don't have the same perception of that. But how do you see like chip music fitting into that, and how did you come to do chip music, coming from like playing the violin, because it's obviously
Not very similar.
fairly different.
Yeah, like I think that's a really good question. So I think in terms of how it's perceived, I haven't really, to be honest, I've not thought about it like that. I know, I'm trying to remember his name. Maybe if I find out later, I will let you know. But there's definitely a few people in academia that do chip stuff. There's this weird world, I think, of kind of like nerdy academics that dabble in strange technical setups, like, and that go further and further down the rabbit hole. So all this live coding stuff and hardware hacking and like hardware modding thing. There's actually loads of those kinds of people that hang out at conferences.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they tried the pop and rock and roll thing, and then they realized, actually, I want to get too much in my head about how I produce a sound. They go, actually, working with a normal DAW is way too easy. Let's make it much more complicated and write paper about it. So I definitely think there's a connection there. So, I mean, one of the people I know is Dominique Pelletier, who's done she's done like a theremin that she's put into a Game Boy on my channel as well. And she's a lecturer as well. So it's definitely a scene for that. I find that actually people that play with these kind of like completely outdated toys in a kind of sometimes really noisy way are like can be weirdly intellectual. So, and then I suppose the second question that you asked me was, why am I doing that? And I think for me, like, I've had lots of different musical influences and lots of things that have inspired me for a long time. And so I've really kind of struggled to find a framework for me that ties everything together. I think the key thing for me is that I've got synaesthesia, so like things are very colorful in my head, and I'm kind of like high without being high all the time, and I just try to find some kind of outlet to express that. And I just figured out that for me, anything to do with video games was a good framework because it's just so weirdly surreal. I think video games in general are sort of like an alternate reality. There's just something really eerily different about them, and that's just something I connected with, and just generally, creating visuals for the music. And really for me on a basic level, the chiptune thing is just that I think it sounds really awesome. Like it's just, there's nothing else that sounds quite like it.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, there's something kind of surreal about it. And I suppose I'm not really a pure chiptune artist. I'd like to combine things. And I also quite enjoy combining sounds together that I perceive to be quite separate. So if I've got like the lyrical classical violin stuff, but then it's kind of like juxtaposed with these really basic machine noises. I don't know, there's something quite cool about that, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of how I got into doing it as well, because I play in a couple of different bands. I play guitar and bass and things, but I got into it initially because I was writing. The bands had like broken up, one of the many times we'd fought with each other and like, had some kind of fisticuffs and then decided we'd never play again kind of thing. But so I had a break. I was making my own music, but I'm not like, I'm from the west coast of Scotland, and maybe, Germany might be similar, but we're not particularly, crooning kind of acoustic guitar people. So I was trying to find ways to spice up the music I was doing, and I found like that electronic stuff through the Game Boys, and I liked combining all the elements. Like I like the kind of acoustic-y or like more guitar-based stuff with electronic music, as well as, I was never a purist chiptune person either. It was kind of the experimentation that was most interesting.
Yeah, and you've got all these cool synths as well. I watched a video called "I Quite Like This One" on your channel a minute ago, and I quite liked it too.
That's good. I'm glad. Well, that's the M8, which is the successor of the the spiritual successor to LSDJ, which that interestingly enough, when I saw it, the guy who made it is Trash 80, who made the original kind of, I believe he did the MIDI stuff for the Game Boy, like the first MIDI implementation for LSDJ. But
yeah.
But I wasn't interested in it at first because it felt like I would be cheating on the Game Boy, if you know what I mean. It felt like, I don't want a computer instead of the Game Boy. But actually, they've done such a good job with it that it keeps that kind of chip stuff alive, even though it's in this very modern package, which I think is a really cool way of blending everything.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. Maybe I should try that at some point.
You should. Well, they're coming up with more orders soon, I think. But I guess when you were saying about combining things, the beauty of that for me was that originally, if you wanted to combine, chiptune stuff, you had to kind of do it separately. So you had to have your Game Boy and then layer it up. Whereas with this, it's got all the engines in there as well, so you can use samples and you can use things. But this now seems like they've paid me, and they haven't.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the cheating thing. I've certainly kind of overthought that a lot. I suppose for me, the starting point has always been kind of the end result, like the starting point's been.
Yeah.
But like, kind of, for me, it's about like what it ends up sounding at the end and what it ends up looking like. And I know there's kind of a very purist community where it's only chiptune if you've bled for it and you've like well, I don't want to say it like that, but you've kind of like really put, and I respect that, the sort of tracker software stuff and really putting the effort in. And it's the same with modular synths. I think there's something really cool about having to recreate everything from scratch and really understanding the technology. But like, I've definitely felt like I've cheated. I mean, I kind of sometimes, I don't know if I should be saying this in public, but I have used software emulations in the past as well. So,
yeah, that's it. You're exiled now from the chip world.
But yeah, I guess, I mean, from writing the book, it's because I've done all these tutorial videos, it's really forced me to sort of try out different hardware setups, and I think it's really inspiring to do that. Yeah.
I think that was kind of my gateway drug into hardware, was the chiptune world, because of that reason. Like, it was interesting to me rather than sitting on my laptop, because that was what I did all day with work and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there was an interesting kind of crossover or like strange juxtaposition with people who there's people who used to be involved in the chip music world who are not anymore, and I think somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they said that they used to think they liked music, but actually they just liked programming the trackers, and it was because they then went and became a programmer, like an actual software developer. And I think that's it. When you're saying about academics and nerdiness, there is that really interesting kind of, it appeals to lots of different people, I think. The creative and the more technically minded.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So you brought up a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about, but I'll come back to it because I want to ask you first about your book. So you've told us already how you kind of came about with it. Where is it available? And I'm going to turn off my phone just now because it's vibrating. Sorry to kill the...
That's right, I didn't hear it. So...
That's good.
So it's available in lots of places, I think. So it's got it's on the Routledge website. It's got its own little portal, and I can send you all of the links. And I know it's kind of on Amazon as well.
Cool. I'll put them below.
Yeah, I imagine it's in. I imagine it's in quite a few different kind of online marketplaces. I haven't really looked, but like I suppose Amazon covers it for most people, doesn't it?
Where's the best place for you? For people to get it?
I don't think it makes a difference, to be honest.
No difference.
Yeah,
okay.
I think the share would be the same. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Pardon me. I have to be honest, when I first saw the title of it and like the explanation of it, I thought, ugh, I've played live. I don't need to know this, right? This stuff.
Yeah,
But I've been reading it. I've not read the whole thing yet. I'm kind of like a third of the way through.
that's what.
Uh, I'm rapid, but I found it really interesting because you didn't just kind of you do talk about like different hardware setups and like in quite a lot of detail, but and I learned quite a lot actually about because I don't tend to perform with Ableton or anything like that, so that's been really interesting. But I liked that both when you were given introductions and also in your interviews there was also kind of you it wasn't purely a technical thing, it was also kind of like a philosophical thing about playing live. You have to consider the audience, talking about visuals and your branding, or not branding really, but persona and things like that.
Yeah.
And I wondered like I found that really fascinating, and I wondered, was that something that you deliberately sought to include, or was it like just a natural consequence, I guess, of?
I think it's because I think it started out, I kind of started from the outset thinking about that, I think for two reasons. The first one is that it's a really big component of the course that I teach on. Like they've got this, and I've taught on this module as well. They've got an artist development module and just generally kind of the whole music marketing stuff, because I guess it's obviously really, there's a lot of competition if someone wants to be a musician. And so it has to be in some way remarkable. But also I think I don't really I try to avoid having really straightforward opinions about things. Like, like for example, when someone's miming, it really depends on the community. So obviously in some cases, like if I went on stage, like having written this book and just pretended to be doing something, I'm sure there'd be like people that don't like it.
Yeah.
But then in other places, like on TikTok or like in the drag community or whatever, like, miming is just such a natural part and kind of almost expected in those cultures. And so I think like a lot of people said, yeah, but, some people read the book as I went along and they said, yeah, but I still don't know what I'm supposed to do. What is my setup supposed to be when there's all these options? And the thing is, it depends because, it depends on the audience. If they don't understand it, then, and I've definitely experienced this, like when I've performed live, is that some audiences really understand everything and they're quite like sort of this whole geeky putting apart what someone's doing and trying to sort of reverse engineer like what each button does. And you go to a different audience and they just, they don't get it really. So they just, they enjoy it in a different way. And so I guess I don't really like it when people are too kind of prescriptive or too dogmatic when they say, okay, like in order to perform live, you've got to split your track into 4 stems and then route them out of Pro Tools into this mixer, like, because it's creative, it's creative just in the same way as the production is creative as well.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I guess coming from the chip music world especially, that was always a big topic of conversation. Like there's multiple threads about how do you actually play this stuff live? Because especially if you're just writing on a Game Boy, it's like, there is live mode in LSDJ, which I guess a lot of people do, but some other people just hit play and then, shake the Game Boy in the air, which is equally as interesting if they do it, in a way that's considered. But it's funny because it seems like it's like a microcosm of kind of electronic music generally. You do have to put a lot more thought into how you're going to perform live, because obviously that's not necessarily part of the creative process. Although there was some bits in the book that it talked about, I can't remember exactly who it was, it might have been the first interview, where they spoke about how they create music now with live performance in mind, so they'll pick specific bits of gear or whatever so they can do that. Is that something that you do, or do you do the opposite way of reverse engineer it and then?
Yeah, so that was Robert Henke. Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting interview because actually I think he does a lot of things in a completely different way to how I would do them. I think I still, even after having written that book, I still feel like I'm more of a studio musician or sort of audiovisual artist that creates something and then, curating the live show is like a separate step for me. And I think it's great when people do what they're doing. But I guess for me, I just have like such a clear idea of the final sound before I've even touched anything, and I get like sort of a vision for a specific song, and I think that's, for me, it's probably because of just my kind of classical music background and just playing piano and then learning music production software and then kind of composing in a kind of traditional way, I guess. But composing for a computer that can't sort of play live in a way.
Yeah. And that's kind of, it reminds me of something else that I was especially interested about. And I don't know if you said it specifically, but it reminded me of David Byrne's book on, I think it's How Music Works. I can't remember the exact title, but he did, I always forget the band name as well, Talking Heads, so singer of Talking Heads, and he spoke about, history of music and all this kind of thing, but he spoke specifically about how before recorded music, the avenue or the venue that people were playing in would radically change the music because people wrote music to the space they'd be playing with. And I thought that was really interesting because it came up in some of, the things you were saying about like the person who was, composing for a particular live performance or whatever. But you said the same thing, I think, in terms of depending on the venue or depending on the audience, that you might take bits out, like certain songs you would strip down a bit and they would go over better. So is that something, when you're saying you've got like a particularly clear vision of the song, if you go somewhere and you're doing that, do you have particular things you would definitely take out, or does it, is it more of an on the cuff sort of, off the cuff, I guess, sort of decision?
I suppose I do try. I mean, I try to make it different live than I do on the record, but still within, I guess, the vision that I've had. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, for me, I put songs. I mean, there's various different things that I do where I put it into stems, or I have some stripped back sections. Normally, I've got some sections that are sort of fixed, and then some sections where I can improvise a bit. Ideally, I try to improvise when I'm not singing because then it gets a bit confusing. So, and then I've got the visuals as well. So for me, having the visuals is kind of important. But I suppose what I do does definitely depend on the audience and where I go. Like I once did this. There was this like networking event on Zoom that I was invited to perform at, and between eating couscous and trying to meet people, they asked me to perform a song, and it's like there would have been no point like trying to set everything up in that way. Like it just wouldn't have worked. So in that case, I just sang to the backing track, really, because that was the only thing that would have actually translated.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to sort of improvise, and I sort of try to see how I feel in that moment as well.
It's funny because when you're saying that you have the, you start with the end result, as it were, I'm like the complete opposite normally, in the sense that I like I like experimenting with, I don't like sound design, right? I get really bored tweaking synthesizers and stuff. It's not, which is probably something I shouldn't admit either, but I prefer finding weird bits of hardware that make a sound and then like seeing where that takes me. But that makes it really difficult to play live because obviously, what do you do with that? And that's why I like the Game Boy, actually, because it was so self-contained, but could also like act as like a MIDI sequencer and things.
Yeah.
But the other, sorry.
Sorry, do you have a favourite live setup? Is there something that you would go to, or?
So I've been thinking about this because I'd like to play again. Obviously the virus ruined everything, but I did used to use the Game Boy as a central thing, but then I would connect different bits of gear to the Game Boy and I would use the MIDI sequencing. So it would usually be needlessly complicated, basically, to try and make it a bit more interesting. So played something in London, and we took the Game Boy and I think it was a Vermona kick thing, because I could never program kick sounds very well, like they sounded crap. So I took this kick module and it just triggered the kick whenever I needed it. And then I had like a Chaos Pad. I tend to use a Chaos Pad all the time because it's very playable. But for future stuff, I've been trying to figure out a way to. I think I would have to write songs specifically to play live, because otherwise, I don't know. I don't know how the hell I would do it without taking a computer, which isn't really something I would want to do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm anti-computer.
Yeah.
Not no
Yeah,
computer, but anti-computer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool though as well when someone just kind of builds a setup and then just goes for it and just does like things on the fly. I mean, that's something I don't really do myself that much, but I really respect it when someone does that and then it goes really well. Because I think,
or badly, I guess.
Yeah. I respect it when it goes badly. But
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like jazz in a way, isn't it? It's like to some degree people just kind of turn up and see what happens and some magic happens in the moment, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, that thing in London, it was a chip music night, although it was kind of a mad experimental thing, and there was people there. It's funny, I've bumped into these people like years later and I didn't realise they were all performing at this thing. But there was somebody who was like a circuit bending artist, and he's got a name that I can't pronounce. His online name is Psychedelic Shushrus or something. But he makes all these amazing circuit bent devices, and he was like performing with like, I don't know if it was just a noise art. Well, not just a noise art set, but it was a noise art set. But it was insane, and they had another guy with a chicken head on, I think, like going around on some mad device. But that was part of the beauty of it, was the whole, like you're saying, the whole experience was wild. Which kind of, and that kind of leads me nicely on to the next bit actually, which was you talked about visuals both in the book and here, and I think I really appreciated the focus on them, because for me, the first time I played live, I played in this wee, electronic music live. I played in this wee cafe thing in Osaka, it was a whole weird fluke that I ended up doing that. But I took it very seriously, and I had 2 Game Boys, and I was like syncing them up and like tempo syncing them and all this stuff. And it was just so much to concentrate on. And afterwards, I was like, oh, that was crap, because I was so focused on doing the thing and getting it right that I didn't like enjoy it or like go mad or anything. So I then kind of radically changed the way we did it, and treated it more like playing in a band, like a performance. And we started creating visuals, and that's how I got into the kind of analog video world and stuff. But I think that's something that we don't, especially bands. I think electronic musicians are much better at doing this, but I think that people neglect the whole visual performance aspect a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know more about your approach to visual stuff, because you mentioned a bit of software in the book, but I can't remember the name of it. And do you tempo sync things? Like, is it MIDI controllable and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what's in a book, like there's so many different options that you have. But in terms of what I do personally, there's a plugin called Ebo Suite, but obviously it's with a laptop, so it might be a taboo. But basically, essentially what I do is I mean, in a way, the way I approach video is kind of quite similar to how I approach audio as well. Because I like to kind of create things and take my time with them and then have this like nice footage. So I use Blender, the graphic software, and I often use Magica Voxel, which is kind of like a voxel editor. So everything consists of cubes, like I guess a bit like in Minecraft.
Right.
Except each cube can only have one color, but like you can put cubes in places and they can be shiny or matte. So I kind of combine those tools and then I end up with some video bits. And then what I do inside of Ableton is there's a tool called Ebo Suite, which allows you to treat sort of like the video in the same way as audio, so as clips. So you can control it with MIDI in the sense that you just can trigger like a pre-recorded video clip whenever you want to. So if I've got a section where I'm improvising, or if I want to play the chorus twice, or like, I want to skip something or whatever, then the video is always going to stay in sync. And then for each section, I just try to make the video, like in the editing process beforehand, I try to make the video so it looks in time with the sound. Often
Smart.
it's like fly through, so it doesn't matter. But if there's like things that move to the beat, then I just try to prepare that. And then I just have like these pre-existing chunks, and I can just like switch between them in a way.
See, I think that's pretty fascinating because I think it's an underexplored area for not for more established like larger musicians and things, but what I've found is either um, musicians in the video art community tend to stay separate. It's very strange to me, but
Yeah.
you usually, what I've found is that people either don't have any crossover, or when they do, they're very they make video, but it won't be like tied into the music or anything. It'll just kind of be a generic thing they put up. Um, but I started. Like my music stuff is much more hardware based, so I've got all these weird video synthesizers and things.
No, that's really cool.
But I did visuals. A friend asked me to do visuals for their live performance last summer. It was at some festival, and it was like a proper, big festival setup. And when we turned up, they had these massive screens, like some of the biggest screens in the UK. Allegedly, they're all split apart.
Yeah.
And the guy who was running the audiovisual stuff was horrified because I was using composite video, and he was like, "What the fuck? Why don't you have like how low quality is that?" And I was like, "It works. It's fine." But everyone else, I think it was somebody mentioned in the book, Rival Consoles was headlining, I think, and he had, of course, had this huge like incredible setup, and I had this single cable that didn't. Yeah, it was frowned upon. But I think that's something that more and more people are looking at doing now, is doing their own visuals. So there are these like much more interest in like circuit bent video devices and like dedicated video things. So it was really interesting to see you bring that up, especially because you said you're a synaesthete. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
curious to know a wee bit more about that because, and I'll definitely probably get abuse for this, but if you, oh shit. So I bought some synthesizers recently, and I bought some Behringer ones, and I was particularly, which is controversial, but people were particularly, or I was particularly interested because they had like different colors of them.
Yeah. Well,
And
same
so
synth, but in different colors.
yeah, and for me that was like brilliant because it meant I've got mild synesthesia in reference to numbers and letters and things.
Yeah, same.
So
Yeah.
so this one's like TD3, but it had to be an orange one because
Because the letters are that color for you.
it was the color, the number. So number 3 is orange,
Oh,
and the same with the
great.
drum machine.
Similar
So,
enough, but for me it's red. Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. That really makes sense for me. Like I can't remember. I really struggle to remember people's names if like the word doesn't go with what they look like. Like
right, aye.
yeah, like someone called Bob can't be blonde. Like it's not. It doesn't work. And I did once I did this I did like some computer science modules when I was at uni. I tried to learn about visual signal processing. And there was like this formula with red, green, blue, so it's RGB, but the B is green. So that really screwed me over. Because like every time the B was there, I was like, oh God, like what color is that? And I even got a pen out to sort of make all the B's blue, but then I colored it with the wrong color, and it.
I think that's pretty fascinating, especially in relation to like music and visuals and stuff, because I've read a bunch about it recently. In fact, there was a follower on YouTube who was like, you probably get synesthesia, and I was like, I'd found out about it when I was younger, and I didn't realize that wasn't something that everyone did.
I know.
And I said to my dad, like, what color is number 4? And he went, what? What the fuck are you talking about? I was like, the number 4, what color is it? And he went, it's just a number. And I was like, oh no, like something's gone wrong in my brain. But
what color is it for you then? For
yellow.
Oh no, it's not.
Yeah,
no,
definitely yellow. But so there are kind of more obviously intensive versions of this. I think mine's has got weaker over the years. Like I have these associations, but I don't particularly like I don't focus on them or anything anymore. I kind of block them out a bit. But I was curious if you had any of the musical things, for example, like you hear colors and things. That's something that's very limited with me. But I don't like I find that really hard to conceive of in relation to writing music. Like, does that? And if you do have it, like, does it change how you approach your visuals? How does it change that and stuff?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's actually the other way around for me. Like, I sometimes have this weird struggle where I think fundamentally I start from a visual standpoint, and then I try to write music that has those colors. I think that's part of why I became really interested in chiptune, because it's really colorful. Like, it's sort of neon bright colors for me. And of course you could say there's also like a cultural connotation there, but I think for me it's just like very bright colors. And I think also I really like rock music, but it's sort of brown and gray, like it's like rust color. So for me, I suppose I don't identify with those colors. So sometimes I have this weird conflict where sort of the emotion of the song or the kind of like feel would ask for one type of sound, but then it's a color I don't like. I also don't necessarily like the color of my own voice. Like, I think it can sound sort of orange, and I just don't want that.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, I definitely try to sort of like combine things, combine the visuals with the music, and try to sort of stick to like a specific palette. The thing that's difficult for me is that most parameters in music can influence the color. So it's like, if I listen to piano music for an hour, so pianos kind of sound blue, but like if I listen to like an hour of piano music, I won't see the blue as much, but then instead like the harmony and the other like music parameters would start to be like the determining factors.
Yeah.
Or like if it was the same piano piece played 3 times through different microphones, so it's like whatever I'm paying attention to. So it doesn't change, it's always the same, but it kind of depends on what factor I pay attention to. And I suppose there's a difficulty of when I'm producing the music myself, I listen to it not as holistically as I will when it's done. And that can sometimes be a bit confusing, so that it will, yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I think it's interesting because it's something that obviously is, inherently very obviously personal and subjective, but also it's something that I used to be very aware of, and then I kind of over time like kind of ignored it a bit because it like purposefully ignored it, if that made sense. Because like you were saying about music, for me words and like days of the week and stuff have all got colors, but it depends on like the arrangement of like the letters. Like some words are just a color for no discernible reason, and then some words have got no color, and you start to go like I started to go a bit mad thinking about it. Like you begin to think, well, where did this color come from? Like, have I made this up? Am I like losing my mind? And this is like just I've tricked myself into thinking this is a thing. But with the RD6 and the TD3 in particular, I was like, no, I can't buy, like, because I've seen it. This is how ridiculous it got for me, was that I saw these at like half price or something, like some blowout sale, but the color was wrong, and I was like, I can't get it because I know that it'll annoy me forever. And I think the music thing in particular about composing music in relation to that is really interesting, because I understand that, but I don't feel it deeply enough to like associate with it, if that makes sense. Or I don't make those associations as strongly. But when it comes to visuals, I definitely do. The visuals have to be right, or it feels weird.
I almost
probably sounds insane to people who have not.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's fascinating to kind of. I don't think I've met many other people that have had the same experience in that sense. But definitely, I've when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of music, and I didn't speak as I only learned English kind of in my teen years. So I was in this, and I always would record songs off the radio onto sort of tape cassettes. So all I had was kind of the sound. I had no idea what the song was about or what anyone was saying, what the singer looked like, what the visual identity was. And I thought that was so nice, but I can't do that now because obviously if you're a lecturer, you can't sort of say this is a nice song by someone, like
Yeah.
but I've definitely felt, I don't know if you felt like that before, where you sort of see what someone looks like, or they've got visuals and you're really disappointed because they look totally different from how you feel that they should look.
Yeah, for me, people, there's the whole thing about people and like, not auras or whatever, but like the personality has a color. And I definitely, I get that, where, especially because in my day job, I work from home. I talk to people mostly online, like colleagues and things,
Yeah.
and their name in particular usually has an association, and so when you do meet them, it can be very, but more so because like the color situation doesn't match. And especially numbers, like I wouldn't give out your username on here, but your username, when it was whatever it was with the number at the end, I was like, oh, like that gave me pause for a second. So I thought that's because it didn't quite match the text of the name.
Oh.
But there's definitely people watching this now who are like, these people are fucking, they are not right.
So what color am I? Like, do I have a color for you yet? Like, or not?
Well, this is where it gets weird, because it's like the name itself might, but then it starts to take on other like tones and things. But then I begin to think, well, is that because of a video I've seen or something? Have I done a weird association, or like with instruments, for example? The bass sounds are either like dark bluey or like red. They're not. They're either both. Like, it has to be one or the other. But then I start to think, well, is that because my friend used to play a red bass when we were in high school or something? And I get so like, obsessed with those things that I try and avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, I know. I don't really try and avoid. I find it quite interesting. I suppose it's difficult to sort of try and find out what the actual formula is for you, and to sort of try and predict that, or get someone else to sort of successfully predict it.
Yeah.
Because there's always like more than one thing that can have a color, and it's like which thing then wins. Is
Right.
I mean, language. With language, it's really tough because, like, words in German will have a completely different color to what color they're in English. So,
Yeah.
like, color words aren't the color of that color. So it's like, the word red is beige, and it's just like doesn't really help.
Well, that's kind of the thing about like I'm trying to think of an example, but like individual letters in a word can have a color, but then the actual word itself will have different ones. So it depends on the shift of perception.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a few people who like subscribe to this channel who've had similar comments about, like, because I brought it up in another video, and they all started telling me their colors for numbers and things,
Okay.
which fucked me up because it didn't make sense to me. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so the other thing I wanted to ask you about, since I don't want to keep you here forever,
That's all right.
was your PhD, because I'm particularly interested, but I definitely do not understand what. So I believe it's psychoacoustics and mixed perception. Is that right?
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, it was really sort of complicated, but basically, I guess I came out of university, and there's all these opinions where it's like, oh, if only you've got a liquid channel, then your mixer's going to sound 10 times better, and it's like you need this, you need that, and it kind of annoyed me a bit that I didn't know actually why something was supposed to sound better than something else. I was like, okay, to what extent is this actually all about taste? Or, if it's all taste, then we might as well not even have a discussion about this and just, pack our bags and not even teach it at uni or anything, because it would be unfair, right? But then on the other hand, I was like, if there is a reason, if there is an underlying rule as to why something sounds good, then it must be somehow, I suppose, grounded in science. So I started off, I guess, during my undergraduate, I became really interested in like sound perception and psychoacoustics. And it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's things like some frequency areas sound louder than other frequency areas. And then there's like weird like illusions. I don't know if you've heard of the McGurk effect, for example. It's like,
No.
I mean, you wouldn't, because why would you? It's like when someone says one word, but you play a video of a different word, similar word, you hear yet another word in terms of how your brain like processes it. Then there's things like masking, where like you can't hear one sound because another sound is playing, but it really depends on the sounds. So like it can get like, there's a lot of like psychological science, or there's something called Gestalt principles, which is like mean that a thing, like something can only belong to one thing or another thing.
So is that like, this reminds me, this kind of goes back to the synaesthesia thing as well, because even people that don't have synaesthesia would like, there's a test of perception where, you know, if you ask someone to read out a word and the word is blue but it's in red, and then you flip it and say, okay, well, tell us the color, it like, they can't do it. It screws with their mind. Is that a similar kind of idea, or is it?
Yeah, it's quite like that, and it's just, you know, like that, but for sound. So there's a lot that goes on in terms of perception, and I suppose when you're mixing a piece of music, it's like, you know, people want it to sound clear, all the elements are separated properly, you've got some kind of balance, like it's tonally balanced, and you've got your 3D sound stage where some sounds are on the left, some on the right, you've got depth and impact and interest and all this stuff. And I was wondering, you know, how actually does this relate to sort of sound perception? And the key thing that I was looking at was kind of clarity and separation. So like, how can you EQ a sound to sound clearer? You know, what's the actual kind of underlying like formula or whatever? And I mean, it's super complicated. I only ended up looking at one very small part of this whole thing. But yeah, so I came up with this metric called a harmonic centroid. I don't know if it's worth trying to explain that now, but it's kind of, if that goes up, then clarity goes up. It's like a central mass of energy of a frequency spectrum. But I don't know if it's worth like unpacking.
So you've got the secret code to making music better, basically. Because I need help.
I think I just have some clever words and computer code things people already knew. But I suppose part of this research is that you're kind of trying to get a computer to mix music, right? And computers are, I suppose, inherently dumb. I hope no one in the audience has got some form of spiritual connection to computer sentience. But I mean, a computer doesn't know how to mix music, so you have to start small, and things that you intuitively do right, you know, aren't necessarily that easy. Or like, you know, if you boost high frequencies and you cut lower frequencies, it will probably get clearer, but only if you do it in relation to this harmonic centroid. So I don't necessarily think that I've like made this groundbreaking discovery that's going to change mixing forever, but it's just one very small kind of answer to thousands of different questions that you need to answer to build like an automatic mixer.
Oh, like Lander, is that the right name? There's
so Lander, they've got for mastering, and then Isotope have got a bunch of different automatic mix tools. I mean, there's more. This was like, you know, a while back that I finished my PhD. Like, there's so many new tools coming out, like so many people working on that, and you know, now everyone's really interested in AI and machine learning. So it's almost like now people don't even necessarily need to know why something sounds good, but they just tell a computer, I like these 10 mixes, but I hate these 10 mixes, figure it out, and then the computer tries to figure it out.
It's funny because it's like, I don't possess the technical knowledge in those areas, obviously, but I think the perception thing's really interesting, because obviously the conversation is one that you see happening all the time in terms of, and people have really like staunch opinions about, you know, especially like monitors and things. So I've seen people complaining, you know, everyone's got some opinion and position in the monitors, and like what you should do with your monitors and where they should be, and like you should listen in 1,000 different sources and all that kind of thing. And luckily I've managed to avoid the wrath of people, because no one, I mean, mine are like fucking basically just thrown in the corner. And I think that there's a wee bit of a reaction against it in some circles, in the sense of like, do you know what? Like, I don't care anymore. Like, I want it to sound good where I'm going to listen to it. And there's a friends band who did relatively well, and they put out a single, and they wanted lots of kick drum. And the guy who was mixing and mastering it said, "Look, the kick drum is like really loud. Like, if anyone listens to this on like a club PA, it's going to be like too loud." And they were like, "No one is ever going to listen to us on a club PA ever. Like, we're never going to be successful like that. So just make it sound good in the headphones." And I occasionally DJ, and I decided to put it on just to, have a laugh. And I sent them a video going, "What the fuck? This kick drum is ludicrous." But it's interesting how it becomes, like, I guess, like in the book you were saying about, making music for the venue, or like with that in mind. I guess that also applies to, or can maybe apply to, the mix and mastering stage. Because no one's going to listen to my music in an arena, I guess.
But the thing is, arenas sound really crap. Like that. That's another thing as well. Is that in some, like, the places where you have the biggest audiences are really not designed to sound good. I mean, because you can't. It's just physically not possible to not have a huge reverb tail in a space that's like 10 kilometers or whatever. I don't know how big an arena is, but yeah, definitely. So. I think that makes a big difference. Some music is mainly listened to on a tiny phone speaker, so it doesn't make sense to have this huge like sine sub there. So
so the bands I play in, we've recorded albums and stuff in the past and DIY'd it all, and kind of the last one we did get someone to master it properly, thank God. But we would record these things and send it to the other bandmates and say, what do you think of this mix? And my bassist player would be famous for saying, "Well, I can't hear the bass."
Yeah.
And you'd say, "Okay," like, and we would try and tweak it, and it's like so loud. And he's like, "Oh, it sounds okay now, but it's still quiet." And we're like, "What the fuck? How can you not hear it?" And he's just listening on his like iPhone speaker. And you're like, "No wonder you can't hear the bass. Like, there's no bass response." Everyone else is like drowned out, sub frequencies.
Yeah, definitely, that is a thing. And I think but then also I suppose when you're in a band, you've always heard your own instrument louder than everyone else's song. That you just don't ever think it's loud enough. Like, that's the thing, isn't it? Everyone wants their instrument to be turned up, except singers. They want their voice to be turned down.
And I guess also one thing that took me a long time to realize was that. And I only realised this when I was doing music production rather than playing in a band, was that, if your guitar has a great tone on its own, like, as soon as you put it in a band context, it's like pointless. You need to kind of get the tone to fit in the sonic space, because like if you've got a particularly bassy tone and then you put a bass in, then it all fucks it all up live anyway.
That's masking, where like basically you can't hear some frequency areas when something else is playing the same frequency area, so you almost only hear the bits that are not masked.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so it really depends on the space, but I think also visually it really depends on the space. I mean, if I play with like a tiny Game Boy at Tomorrowland, I think it would get visually a little bit lost. Not that I ever will, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, you never know.
You never know. But maybe that's what I will then do, just to sort of piss myself off.
Yeah.
Like, seeing I'm doing it, what are you going to do now?
And that'll be the end. That'll be the end of all our careers.
Yeah.
Although I've tried hard to annoy people, and I've still managed to survive, so we'll see. Well, that's about everything I had for asking you. Final, where can people find you? I guess this is a chance for the plug. Although by the end of the video, no one ever listens anyway. There's like 1% of people listening at this point, I think.
Yeah, so I've got my own YouTube channel, which I suppose that's the easiest place to go to. The music is on all of the sort of normal streaming platforms, all the usual suspects, like Apple Music, Spotify, and so on. I've got a Bandcamp as well, to make it as confusing as possible. Whatever.
Yeah.
I've even got 2 websites, but I suppose I think the YouTube channel is the easiest because all the other things are always linked underneath every video, so it's a good starting point.
And they'll be linked below. linked below.
Right.
As long as I remember to do it. And as long as this actually recorded, I'm just double checking my Zoom recorder. Well, thank you. Go watch
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Kirsten's
That was great.
channel, buy the book. You'll definitely learn something because I did, and I clearly know everything. So, that's fine. For now, goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye.